Hello, it's the Sofa Soldier, bringing you the long-awaited Metal Gear Solid 5 review. I know, it's taken a while, but I had to play through the game first. I'm a massive Metal Gear fan, and I really wanted to do it justice. This isn't something you can just steamroll through and experience everything it has to offer, and really have something to say about it. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, I think I'll get into it. With MGS5, Hideo Kojima, he's seeking to wrap up the MGS timeline essentially with the last chapter in Big Boss's story, set in 1984. But the big question really is, does it stand up to its predecessors? This is where it gets interesting. From my point of view, it does. It stands up extremely well as a great game, albeit in a very different way to the previous games in the series. It's not the linear, laser focused, heavily scripted game of old that we're used to with the MGS series. Whilst there's a classic MGS5 story in there, and the storytelling devices are very familiar to people who've played the game before, it relies on player investment. Not talking heads in codec conversations, no uber long cutscenes anymore, which, whilst it's refreshing, is a little bit of a surprise, I think. I would have liked to have seen a few more cutscenes in there, especially. Although I'm quite happy that they omitted a lot of the codec stuff. That's been dealt with very well, which I'll get into a bit later. It could use some more exposition from time to time, just to explain what's going on in certain cutscenes. Sometimes it very much leaves it up to the imagination, and you're forced to do your research later through the cassette tapes that you pick up from obviously completing various parts of the story, or you find them around the world. So essentially the codec has been replaced with the Walkman, which is fine, but the problem is that the Walkman and listening to everything on it is entirely optional. So unless you want parts of the story to just not really make sense, you're going to have to actually spend some time listening to tapes and filling yourself in. But then again, it's something nice to have on in the background when you're out exploring, I've found. So it's quite cool. It lends itself to the situation and the atmosphere very well. Onto the setup though. After initially a very slow start, you're thrown straight into the open world to discover it for yourself and become familiar with the tactics that you're going to employ. You'll learn how to scout out bases and all of that kind of stuff yourself, essentially. And that's what I really like about the learning process in this game. It doesn't force tutorials on you, it's very organic. You find out through making mistakes, some of them hilarious, some of them rage-inducing. The majority of the great parts of this game are found through happy accidents, I found. There are, story missions and side ops, which are obviously side missions, open from the get-go. And it's refreshing and often amusing to really learn by doing. So, what's the story like? At the core of it, it's a straight-up story of revenge, essentially, or at least it begins that way. After awakening from a 9-year coma and barely escaping assassination, Snake reunites with his old comrades like Ocelot, who's played brilliantly by Troy Baker. I have to hand it to him. Troy Baker's awesome. If you don't know who he is, he did Joel in The Last of Us, and he's been in a ton of other games as well. And Kazuhira Miller as well. Master Miller, for those that remember Metal Gear Solid 1. They're two soldiers with shared ideals but very different methods. And this actually makes for some great banter and arguments between them in certain cutscenes. Yeah, I really enjoyed that part. And you meet up with them, and then you find out that XOF and its commander Skullface, which people will remember them from Ground Zeroes if you played them. They were behind the attack that killed Snake's men and left him bedridden for almost a decade. They destroyed his base in the Caribbean. So now, essentially, Snake has to establish a new mother base and must track down and eliminate Skullface before he becomes a world power in his own right, with his own weapons of mass destruction, or whatever he's up to, because it's not entirely quite clear at the start, but you know that he's up to something bad. Along the way, you do meet a unique and colourful cast of characters, heroes and villains alike. Some of them more surprising than others when you finally get to the reveal of, who they actually are. But nevertheless, it's really good fun to have these. I don't find they're quite as memorable as some of the old ones, but to be honest, I don't really mind. It's well written, it's fun, and they're really interesting and vivid characters, both to look at and to watch and to listen to. They each have their own opinions, their own political and even sometimes religious beliefs that dictate how their character develops. And it's great to obviously have that level of depth again in a game, and especially in a market now where there's so many games with, just quite frankly, fucking bland characters and bad character design. All of these themes, these geopolitical themes and the beliefs and opinions and how it shapes a person, become really a big part of the Phantom Pain's narrative and how it ultimately ends up. The big leap forward in terms of the Phantom Pain that distinguishes it from its predecessors is the gameplay itself. Completely overhauled. I mean, if you've played Ground Zeroes, you essentially know how it plays, but Ground Zeroes was like a drop in the ocean next to this and what's really on offer. Player interaction is at the forefront of the design here. Literally almost anything you can think of you can do, and it's so rewarding. It's hilarious at times, it's frustrating at times, it's just fantastic to experience it all and really feel creative as well. Not in, say, a Minecraft sort of way, but if I want to get into a base, I can do it X way instead of Y. There's no right or wrong way of doing anything. You can decide to be super stealthy and go for an S rank, not kill anyone, use really unconventional tactics to sneak inside bases, be super cautious, or you can just strap on your crazy battle armor with a grenade launcher and get really tooled up and just go in there and destroy stuff. And it feels equally as rewarding to play both ways. It's really fun, and the kick up the arse that the series actually needed. The total freedom of infiltration, like they've said in the campaigns, it really is there, and it does stand up and distinguish it from everything else that's out there. The open world itself is absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's massive as well. Probably not as massive as something like The Witcher 3, but for an open world stealth action game, it's huge. I never would have thought that the two areas in it, Central Africa and Afghanistan, where you start, would be as huge and diverse as they are. They're incredibly immersive and natural. They feel historic. There's areas with real depth to them. Like in Afghanistan, there's Babylonian ruins, and there's abandoned, burned out villages that have been destroyed by militia in Central Africa, as well as mangrove swamps. It feels alive, albeit I think, despite the fact that there's ambient wildlife in the area as well as soldiers and troops, it can feel a little sparse at times between bases or encampments where there's a lot of enemies or different things going on. You'll very rarely encounter a foot patrol, for example, outside of a built up base area. If you're lucky, you'll run into maybe a column of tanks or a couple of cargo vans moving from place to place. That being said, though, it's still an incredible achievement. Mother Base is probably the most important part of the game, and I think this is probably what might put off classic MGS players, because to them Mother Base might feel like a sort of meta game thing where essentially, you know, you're micromanaging all of these staff that you're Fultoning in with the Fulton balloon, which, by the way, is absolutely hilarious and really fun to use. It gets damn right addictive when you're looking for the guys with the best stats for your mother base and everything and trying to get them all out of the field. Mother base is incredibly important, and people might think that it's all essentially a numbers game, it's all part of the meta game, and it can get quite boring. I just want to go out and experience the story. I get that, totally. But the way I've chosen to base my opinion with this game really is that it is a Metal Gear Solid game, but it's a completely different type of Metal Gear Solid game. It's a Metal Gear Solid game for the new generation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's still got the story and the important themes and metaphors and the characters that are all in a Metal Gear Solid game. It's just the gameplay's moved forward to essentially fit the times that it's in, and I like it. Admittedly, there are probably some purists out there who say, "Oh, you know, this is rubbish. This is a step backwards. This is Metal Gear Solid Light." And to them, you know, I'd just like to say, if you don't like it, go back and play Metal Gear Solid 2. Go back and play MGS3. We're not stopping you. You know, it's just games have moved forward, and people need to move forward with them. Essentially, going back to Mother Base and ending the rant, Mother Base works comprehensively and very well. It's not a lot of micromanaging, or it's less than you would think that you'd need to do, because that whole kind of thing, the XCOM style system, where it's researching and developing different weapons and building up troops and stuff like that and creating squads, that kind of stuff really doesn't interest me. But in the Phantom Pain, it really did interest me. For example, like leveling up your R&D grants you access to new weapons, new camo, new gadgets that you can develop to use in the field. If you level up support, it, you know, allows you to call in different fire support options, including, you know, smoke bombardment, sleeping gas bombardment, artillery bombardment, all sorts of different things, helicopter support, tons of different stuff. That's obviously, of course, if you need to like make a hasty exit or cover your escape, it's very, very useful. They can also speed up your supply drop time if you run out of ammo or suppressors. Leveling up the intel department obviously provides you with up-to-date troop movements and locations, as well as locations for rare and natural resources that you can use for expanding and developing Mother Base. All of this plays into your experience on the ground as well, so it doesn't feel like a wasted effort to take time going between bases and fishing out the best troops and the best resources. All of it benefits your experience in the single player game later on. You know, you can go and you can develop the gun that you want or that you will need for the next important mission that will make your life a bit easier. It really does a good job of making you feel rewarded for the effort you're putting in the meta game, whilst not taking away from the story. And that's what I liked so much about Mother Base. What makes the Phantom Pain such a joy to play and experience are all of the small touches that are in it. For example, if you want to hide in a toilet from nosy patrolling guards, right, try playing a tape through the speaker on your Walkman, a tape of the soldier with stomachache, right, which is a classic throwback to Johnny Sasaki, the soldier in all of the old MGS games with, let's say, bowel issues. And you can watch all of the guards that are near your portaloo kind of walk away in disgust and not disturb you. If there's a sentry that's a real nuisance that won't budge, great idea. You know, get his attention with a girly poster on your cardboard box. Then when he drops his gun and starts fawning all over you, you can leap out and CQC him to the floor and knock him straight out. The depth of the mechanics in this are just so insane that I didn't even realise the game's fast travel system existed until I sat in a cardboard box on a delivery point at a base so I could avoid detection, and then ended up whisked halfway across the map by the next truck that pulled in. It totally blew me away. The stuff that you can only really discover for yourself. Half of the fun is that sense of fulfillment when you discover something, new methods of doing things. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way to play this game, and that's just what makes it so great and unique. The dynamic weather and the day-night cycle really impact your experience, and no two missions are ever the same because of it. Sandstorms, essentially, they make you and the enemy almost totally blind and deaf, enabling you to sneak past effortlessly or accidentally run right into the path of a pack of guards, depending on your luck and how much field reconnaissance you've done with the binoculars to mark enemies. Rain will make the sound of your footsteps harder to hear and essentially will wipe away all traces of your existence, including the footsteps you leave behind. But the resulting puddles will make nasty noise traps after it stops. Rolling about in the water or lying prone in the water for too long, hiding from guards, can actually make you smell, which will attract guards, not because they like the smell, but because they're wondering where the hell it comes from. The same goes for if you hide for too long in dumpsters as well, which I thought was hilarious. At one point, I had been hiding in a dumpster for several minutes after clearing up a base, just because I wanted to leave the game on pause so that I could earn more GMP from soldiers that were out on a mission that I'd commissioned from Mother Base. And I came back having got a drink, jumped out of the dumpster, and went back to Mother Base and was greeted by Ocelot chucking a bucket of water over me, telling me I stink and demanding that I have a shower. And like, there's flies that buzz around your head and everything. The attention to detail is just stupid. It's so good. I've never seen anything like it before, and it can be downright hilarious. The controls are essentially the same as Ground Zeroes, like I've mentioned before. They're really tight, they're fluid, they're responsive. They've got intuitive contextual commands, for example when you're interrogating enemies or taking cover, even counter-attacking with CQC. In general, it's a very, very good control system and a great modernisation of what already existed. As you progress through the story, you unlock buddies as well, which you can take out into the field with you. Each are unique and useful, though I found D-Dog and Quiet to be my preferences. D-Dog is essentially, well, he's a dog, he's a wolf dog, that can sniff out and spot distant enemies and raw materials or natural resources you can use for Mother Base. He can sniff out prisoners, he can even distract or attack guards for you. If you level him up enough, and if you develop the right gear for him through R&D, you can even get him to Fulton guards out of the field for you. If you've knocked them out with a tranquilizer gun, for example, he can run up and put a Fulton balloon on them and get rid of them. Quiet, the sniper, she moves faster than the eye can see, so in a matter of seconds she can infiltrate and scout an entire enemy base from above. She marks anything in her field of view on your map, which is incredibly useful. In terms of your interaction with her, you can synchronize shots to take down pairs of guards. You can get her to cover your advance or escape. This is also a great distraction for guards if you want to sneak in and do something else, for example free a prisoner. She can cover you, start taking out guards, and they'll focus their attention on her whilst you go and do all the dirty work on the side. She can even shoot thrown explosives into vehicles or groups of attackers. You can tell her to shoot something, you throw a grenade through the air, and she will ricochet the grenade into a pack of guards or an oncoming helicopter or something. It's really quite something to experience, and she's very useful in a lot of situations, especially ones where you're dealing with big open expanses of land outside and sparse cover. She can really be of a lot of use. D-Walker is essentially a highly mobile bipedal tank, like a mini Metal Gear. He's ideal for assaulting bases. If you just want to go in with shock and awe, he's got absolutely ridiculous unlockable weaponry that you can develop for him. Gatling guns, missile pods, a flamethrower, even a CQC arm, like a big bionic arm that he has that can like uppercut guards so hard that they fly through the air, which is genuinely hilarious. If you develop different heads for him, one enables him to go into stealth mode so enemies can't see him when he's left idle. Another allows him to become essentially a remote sentry turret when you leave him to his own devices. What's great about the buddy system is each buddy changes how you experience every different mission. I already have so many fond and funny memories already, and none of them are the same as how my friends played it, which is why it's so great to share stories. And I think that's just the hallmark of a great game, which we don't tend to have so often anymore. For example, in what other game can you tranquilize a guard, strap C4 to him, then Fulton him into the path of an enemy gunship and blow him up and take the helicopter out? Like, the possibilities are just endless. I mean, whilst I have been heaping praise on MGS5 and it is an astonishing game, it does have its problems. Whilst missions are fun, you know, they're varied and reward planning and stealthy execution, the boss fights are different in a way that makes them less atmospheric than in previous entries. They're fun and they're different, but I don't know how to explain it. They don't feel quite as important or as real standout pieces of your game experience. They're not as iconic as they were before, but it's a slight nitpick. Likewise, the world is so massive with so much to do that it's easy to lose where you are in the story, which unfortunately is an incredibly slow burner until about halfway through the game, when it really starts kicking up a notch. You're sometimes left scratching your head until you take the time to listen to all the Walkman tapes which have replaced the codec conversations, which can be a bit of a bummer if you're really looking for a deep story experience. You're going to have to invest extra time in it. Classic MGS, the story is even more metaphorical than its predecessors, and whilst the game is by far the most accessible to new players, the plot certainly isn't. The online FOB system, the forward operating base, is a great concept. Essentially it's build an online base, defend it against invasion by another player Dark Souls style, but it's sadly intrusive to the story mode, forcing you to set one up in order to progress in the single player campaign at one point in the narrative, which is extremely annoying, especially if you've got a bad internet connection. And I found it to be a problem because their servers weren't fantastic, you know, in the first few days before they patched it. And it can easily be abused via microtransactions, which Konami have stuffed a lot of them in there for those who've got deep pockets. Worse still, failing to defend your base, even if you're playing in offline mode, so you don't have to worry about notifications, will cost you GMP, which is the cash you've been working so hard for in single player. You need GMP to upgrade your base and to create new weapons and new camo and everything. And it's actually, instead of having a pool of money that it takes it out of from online mode, it actually takes it out of your single player money, which is incredibly annoying. Also, it's a bit of a grind fest if you want to upgrade your base online. Konami have basically said that, oh, you can earn mother base coins, which are the unique currency that you use online, to upgrade your base just through playing it. But what they don't mention is that you get 30 for free every time you log on, and you get a few every time, you know, you have a successful infiltration on an enemy base and you manage to get away with resources and soldiers, essentially, right? But it costs like 20,000 to upgrade your base. So you're literally forced to pay microtransactions if you want to have a decent online experience, which is, I'm sorry, it's shit. And it shouldn't happen, not in a $60 game or a £50 full price game. However, the overall assessment, the final score, essentially, and overall, MGS5 is Kojima's swan song. It's absolutely epic, it's detailed, it's deep, whilst still being uniquely different from any other open world game. Its mechanics, its Easter eggs, the gameplay, the presentation, it absolutely embarrasses lesser pretenders to the throne. Though its story arguably lacks some of the focus or the realistic grounding of its predecessors, it's a beautifully chaotic tale of how, through even the most selfless of actions, men create their own demons and in their desperate search for peace become everything they fought against. This game is incredible. It's a must buy. It's fantastic and it's easily one of the best games of the year. I'm giving this 9 out of 10. It's certainly not perfect, but it's so damn close to being there. And it's well worth your money. Definitely check it out, people. I've been the Sofa Soldier. Take it easy.
Extraction arrived at Mother Base.